I don't think that Lasha is actually the strongest man to ever live. And I know that this is a bit of a bold statement, but I have a justification for it, and I'd like you to hear it. All the way back in 1988, Leonid Taranenko became the first man to clean jerk over 265 kilos. So he did 266 kilos at the Samboy Chips Cup, actually, which is a funny story for another day. Before him, it was Anatoly Pizarenko, who was the first man to clean jerk 265 kilos. He took the record from 258.5 kilos all the way to 265, not by himself, but mostly by himself. And before him, there was Vasily Alexeyev. Vasily Alexeyev was a totally different type of lifter. He took the record from 220.5 kilos and brought it up, again, not totally by himself, but almost all by himself, all the way up to 256 kilos. So that's a 35.5 kilos improvement. Now, my point being that where a person like Vasily Alexeyev, a person like Anatoly Pizarenko, a person like Leonid Taranenko, if they were put in the same situation as Lasha, I don't think that they would have lifted less weight. Actually, I think that they might have lifted more. The thing is that back in the days where weightlifting was much more advanced in a way, there were many more world records, there were many more exciting things happening, really. Lifters had a totally different vision of what it meant to be the strongest man in the world. So when Vasily Alexeyev took his first world record in 1970 and clean jerked 221.5 kilos, that was the same improvement on the all-time clean jerk world record as Lasha, who did 267 kilos to add 1 kilo to the world record. And yet, Vasily just kept going. So he did 221.5 kilos, and some 7 years later, he brought it up to 256 kilos by himself. Now, that's where it gets a little bit tricky, because how do you compare a lifter that lived in this kind of period to a lifter that lived in Lasha's period, where the world records had not been broken in 30, 40 years? And I think that's an interesting argument to make, although that's not really the one that I'm trying to make. I just think that, in general, I just assume that it's a little bit unfair to take a lifter like Anatoly Pizarenko, Leonid Taranenko, and put them by default on a lower step than Lasha, because they started from different standard, and they actually both attempted the world record, the all-time world record at least, many more times than Lasha did. Lasha, in his entire career, which spanned from 2015 to 2024, clean jerked or attempted an all-time record clean jerked once, just once. And yet, by default, because he lifted more on this one day, he will be considered forever as a better clean jerker than all the lifters that I've mentioned this far. And while I think that it's obviously mainly due to things like the weight classes changing when they really shouldn't, especially in the super heavyweight class, it's due to things like drug testing, obviously, things like this. I think that when talking about the strongest man to ever live, you should also think about the mentality of the lifter. And while in the snatch, Lasha was by far, obviously, the best of all time, especially in the super heavyweight class, in the clean jerk, which is what, in my eyes, define who the strongest lifter is, Lasha just wasn't all that. He was obviously extremely strong, and there's no arguing with this. He's the person that lifted the most weight ever on camera. But I do still think that he might not be the strongest man to ever live, and that his 1 kilo, 2 kilo improvement on the all-time clean jerk world record just isn't enough to cut it.